Good morning, all you Vivid members attending our SIG talk on IT operations today. We've got a couple of great presentations around SiteScope in the testing world, as well as migration to OMi. You are listening to the Vivid SIG talk, which is a series of calls that we have on the third Thursday of every month. And in the IT operations space, these events are practitioner-led type calls from partners as well as end users in how they're using the tools, how they're successfully making migrations work, customizations, those kind of things. And we have these things every month. And if you would like to participate, we're looking for a 15 to 20-minute presentation on any topic you want to talk about within the IT operations space. And would love to have you. We're currently scheduling for the June 21st event. We've already got one presentation lined up, looking for another, and then we'll go from there. But it's just a great way to share the with the community some real world kind of presentations. And I'll be your host today. My name is Rocky Pisto. I'm a longtime Vivid member, and I run the Vivid Engage program for partners, which provides them a vehicle to share their information with you as Vivid members. And today I'm honored to have a couple of great presenters. Bogdan Wozniak from Slovenia is going to be our first speaker. He's from S&T. And they're an integration partner in EMEA. And then I've got Niels Hoying, who has an EMEA type name, but he's from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and works for a customer in the utility space. So we've got a couple of great presentations scheduled for you today. You can tweet questions on our Twitter page if you'd like, or you can ask questions here, and we'll talk to you about that here in a second. This is a live session. It's being recorded so that members that could not attend that have registered for this event can hear it at a later date, and also get all the Q&A that came through the questions, and the answers to those questions will be all part of that recording. Everyone that's registered for this event will get that recording in a few days. So if you want to ask questions, we have this webinar control panel off to the right there. And you see that little orange arrow at the top that expands it or hides it. And there's an area that says questions/chat. And you can put your questions in there, and we can try to either answer them if we have time during the SIG talk, or we'll get to them after and put it in the recording version of this. So before I get to Bogdan, who will start with the first presentation, Bogdan, just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing for your company.
Hello, everyone. This is Bogdan Wozniak from S&T Slovenia. I am a technical consultant for a partner, for Micro Focus partner company. I've been working with, for the past 18 years, I've been working with products in the field of IT service monitoring, starting with the old NNM and going on to Operations Manager and BSM and SiteScope and now OMi. So this is basically my background. And today I want to talk to you about how to survive the OM to OMi migration. I know that the deadline is approaching for end of support for the old OM. But for those of you who have not yet migrated or are reluctant to do so, this presentation is basically for you. I want to talk about on a business case of one customer, which is not big in terms of scale. In terms of scale, is more like you would call it a demo environment. But it is interesting in terms of integration and the depth of integration and depth of customization that was done on this customer and had to be migrated to OMI. And so I hope you can all take away some experience or something what lies ahead if you have a somewhat similar environment.
No,
okay.
That's great. So go ahead. It's all yours, Bogdan. Thank you.
Thank you. So I want to talk about the environment that we did. Like I said, this is a business case, a real business case that we did last year. The challenges we faced, the plan we set up, the execution of the plan, and about all the things that went wrong and were ultimately overcome, and what happened after we moved to the production. So the environment they used was made around the OMW, Operations Manager for Windows. This was their hub, their main central point of the events. Events that came in from network environment through the NNMI, from servers and applications through SiteScope, and some applications send direct SNMP traps and other types of messages into, and everything was concentrated in Operations Manager, which was then in turn upward integrated to Service Manager for ticketing, automatic ticketing. Anyone who did that, you know, you have to have a very clean environment, otherwise you will have hundreds of tickets open and you would just get a mess. So that was a problem. Rock just told me I'm not showing full screen. I'm not sure what that means. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, you look fine to me.
Looks
I
fine.
see your whole screen.
Okay, good.
Yeah, but I do see a screen. Sorry, this is Anne-Marie. I do see your next slide on the right-hand side.
Okay, so I'm showing you the wrong monitor, obviously.
No, I do see your presentation, but hang on.
Let's see if this. No, this is not better. Good. What can I do? Probably have to choose another monitor.
Now we do see your screen, but maybe you can go to slideshow.
Yeah, when I go to the slideshow, it switches to the wrong monitor. So this is the slideshow, but it should be on a different monitor.
It's still clear.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Okay, good. So right, like I said, the OM is integrated into Service Manager for ticket opening and to Enterprise Alert application for notification of critical alerts through 4 different channels: the SMS channel, the email, the voice, and the mobile application. On top of that, the customer has some custom developed applications for the features that were not available at the time of installation in out-of-the-box HP environment, and of course some reporting which reported on systems resources, monitor system resources. So this was basically the environment, and what we had to do is, like I said, replace OMW with OMI. We had to upgrade Service Manager to the latest version. We decided to get rid of the external database to make OM more robust and more independent, and if possible to get rid of as many as possible of these custom applications because they're difficult to maintain, and if we can replace them with some out-of-the-box feature of OMI, that would be a bonus. So the challenge was, of course, to migrate all of the event sources. Like I said, we had OM agents, we had SNMP trap sources from applications, devices, all kind of things on the network. All the network devices monitored by NNMI and SiteScope. Migration of the policies. The customer has a very heavily modified and a lot of custom policies within Operations Manager to the point where we were translating the text of the events. So this was a big challenge, how to move all this and what will happen when we move them into a new environment. Then the migration of the service models, because for a lot of their services, service models were built, and not only built, but they had very complex propagation and calculation rules, which had to be migrated. And then, of course, the migration of the ticketing integration into Service Manager was again heavily customized. The migration of this custom application, upgrading Service Manager to the latest version, finding a new reporting solution, and of course provide the minimum downtime during the migration, and the possibility to fall back if migration fails. I mean, we didn't think the migration will fail, but the customer was worried because they want to run this monitoring system 24/7, that finally when we make the switch into production, something will go wrong and we have to be able to switch back and remedy whatever problem we might have there. So the plan was to do a side-by-side installation of the new products, to do the event integration between the old OM into the new OM, and then just slowly build all the new functionality, move all the functionality into the new products, and then at the end just switch all the event sources, which had to be done in the same business day, switch all the event sources and just shut down the old systems. This was the plan, this is how it was executed, and it eventually worked. So that's not much of a story. My story was around everything that happened in between when we were building this parallel system, starting with the paradigm shift from the old objects into CIs and KPIs and status calculations. And this was just from the point of view, I don't know, of a system administrator, this was just going into a jungle, because everything was just blown up and all the things that we never knew or cared about, now we suddenly had to worry how the status of the object of the CI is calculated, where does it come from. So to keep the problems at the minimum and to mimic the old system as much as possible, it was decided early on that we will only use events for the status calculation of the CIs, of the objects in the new system. So nothing else. We just want, when the event comes, just like it was in the old OM, when the event comes, the event has a color, has a severity, and I want this light bulb to light up with the same color. So, but of course, the first thing you have to do, you realize in the new OMI, the event KPI is disabled by default. Because obviously the HP wanted us to move to these new fancy KPIs, which were much too granular for our need. So the first thing we had to do is enable this event KPIs. So after that, we were able to mimic the old system and then start building the service model. The migration guide is very promising about how much topology you can transfer from the old service models into new ones. Well, in reality, I can only transfer nodes, the ones that actually receive events. Everything else had to be rebuilt from scratch, which is not such a big thing, but you have to be aware of it. But then when you start building it, you say, which CI types am I going to use? There are so many. For all of you who ventured into OMI, there are so many CI types to choose from. So again, we didn't find a really good guide about this, but the ultimate solution was that only the top level objects will be of type business service, because they have some special properties that we can use, such as the historical KPI logging, and all others will be CI collection. This was because they're very easy to implement. But then, of course, there were exceptions because of the special propagation and calculation rules. For those of you who know, in the old operations manager, you had a very, very complex calculation rules. But I'm going to talk about this a little bit later. First, I want to say, when you build a tree, a service tree, then you have to create a view a view that will show you this tree, because you build the tree in the database, but then you have to show it to the operators, to the users. And even that it's not a trivial thing. It's not difficult, but you have to know exactly what you're doing. So after some trial and error, we realized, or we were given hints from the HP, that what you have to use, the basic thing is that you use this, what is written here, the impact perspective. You use a special perspective into the view with which you make sure that the tree is drawn correctly, so that the status is, and this impact perspective will provide the same path that is used for status calculation, which means that usually the status comes when the event comes for some CI, for some object, like here this server at the bottom, the yellow one. It will propagate upwards, and you will have this propagation path correctly written. So this was one of the things that we learned, that this we have to use this impact perspective. So that's good to know. About the status calculation, OM had a fantastic tool called multi-threshold calculation rules, where you could, if you had several children under one object, you could very granularly define what will happen when one of them or more of them become of certain status. And the customer was using a lot of these rules, and it was the first surprise. There are no multi-threshold calculation rules in OMI. You have a simple rule which basically propagates the most critical status upwards, and then you have the percentage rules, which is really a very, very simplified version of this multi-threshold calculation rules. And then you have Groovy scripts. You have the API, a scripting API, with which you can do whatever you want, but you have to script it from scratch. And the next thing, propagation rules. That's another thing that does not exist in OMI, where you could say, I have a child which is not really that critical to me, and I want to propagate its status upwards with a diminished severity. So if it lights up, let's say, with a major severity, I want to decrease this severity, so the parent will only light up with minor severity. So we had to implement this. We even had a situation where you did not want to propagate at all. Why would you do that? Why would you have a CI in a service tree which you do not want to propagate its status? Well, the simple answer is because it was there. We had to move it. We had to migrate it, and the customer said, we need this. So it had some practical application, because the system was designed in a way that all major and critical alerts triggered automatic incident creation in Service Manager. So if you got a critical alert for a CI, which is not important, you still wanted to open a ticket, but you didn't want it to influence your service. You just wanted to see a little red light shine somewhere in the service tree, but you didn't want to propagate that. So these were all the challenges we had to do. And like I said, there are no propagation rules, not in this form in OMI. So what we end up doing is creating all this Groovy script, actually mimicking the multi-threshold calculation rules, scripting it from scratch until it behaved exactly like it did in the old OM. And then we created some special CI types, and then this script said, okay, you can see here in the color, I have the CI, the left-hand side, which is kind of blue-green, is the normal CI, and then the one that has the arrow, downward arrow, this was, I used this one. I said, okay, this will be decreased by 1. It will propagate its status decreased by 1. And then the right-hand side, you have this empty square, which does not propagate its status. So we can see here the end result. when we propagate it from the red one, you don't propagate this because the parent is yellow. So the status that actually propagates at this moment on this picture is this middle one, which propagates its major status, but it is decreased by 1. So this was a major thing. After we had this done, it was basically, we basically had the project figured out. But this was a major thing, how to get all these things done. Like I said, the documentation is there, but it's not really specific on how to do these specific things. So it was a lot of trial and error, and some help from some great people from Micro Focus that we finally got this thing going. Okay, going on to policy migration. We had to obviously move from old infrastructure SPI into management pack for infrastructure, where again we ran into this different paradigm, the way policies are handled in the new product. You have now management templates, and you have aspects, and you have management policies, and then you combine policies into aspects, which are then combined into templates. And it seems complicated. I know it has a purpose, and I kind of like it now, but when you first see it, it's a mess, and it takes a while to get used to it. But here there was not so many problems. Even with the custom monitoring policies, they transferred pretty well. The only hiccup we had was that at some point, some policies had some kind of instrumentation folders attached to them, and when you try to edit them in OMI, they wouldn't edit. The editor wouldn't open. So ultimately, the solution was to create an empty policy in OMI, to create the raw, to copy the raw data from the old policy into the new policy, and then save it, and then it worked. So this was the only hiccup related to the policy. Otherwise, policy migration went pretty smoothly over to OMI. The same could be said about service manager integration. The old service manager had the so-called SC Auto, this kind of script-based engine, which was the integration point between the operations manager and the service manager. The new integration was based on web service, and of course, out of the box, nothing worked. Any feature that I'm about to show you today, nothing worked out of the box. But fortunately, everything. So we had a ton of support cases, but in the end, the only problem with this was that there was a delay. It took longer than we thought. Ultimately, everything was solved, but it just took longer than we thought. We had special things here because the customer had this kind of delay with incident creation, because for the noisy sources that would just jump up and down a lot, you would have incident created all the time. And so this in the old system, this thing was scripted into this integration script, and the script would wait for 90 seconds during business hours, or 5 minutes outside of business hours before opening the incident. And if the event was closed during this time window, then no incident would be open. And this was something that was, like I said, scripted before, but now the OMI has the so-called time-based event automation, and we were able to use this feature, out-of-the-box feature, to implement this same functionality. So this was great. Mapping server CIs, the service manager CIs to correct CIs in OMI was also not the problem. The only problem was the customer wanted to see again the light whenever an event that tells you that the service manager is not available. You get an event from the OMI will create an event, but there is no CI, no object associated to this event. So if you build a service tree where you want to see a graphical representation that the service manager integration is not working, you don't have it. You just get an event. And what we end up doing is creating our own object, our own CI, and using the so-called related CI hint, which is here in colors, which will give you basically 4 hints in these 4 different colors that you see on the screen. And this is hard-coded. You can't do anything about it. So what was advised to us was to create a CI, an object, that is using one or more of these fields as their properties. They didn't say which properties we have to fill in. So this was again trial and error, but ultimately, as you can see here in the table below, I used 2 of the properties to match this CI to the event. And with this, then this integration started working properly, and whenever service manager is not available, we get a nice little light in the service tree. So this is again something that you will probably not find in the documentation. As far as the custom applications go, the customer used the event archive. The OMI, the old OM, had this problem. The database was not very good. It was initially Microsoft SQL Express. It was not coded very well. So if you had a lot of history messages, it would take forever to open history. And that's why they had a custom solution where they would only use maybe a week of events in the operations database. Everything else was exported into an external SQL database. And fortunately for us, OMI has a better database. We're using embedded Postgres, but it's coded better. So there was no need for the external solution, and we were able to do this event archive. So we scratched one of the custom applications off the list, which was great for the customer. And then they had another thing which is really critical for them. It says is SLA reporting and service status portal, which is basically they used the 4 objects, the top level objects on their service tree, and they publish their status on their web portal for everyone to see. And it has to be up 24/7, and it's very critical for them, and the SLAs are bound to this, and they create reports which show the downtime of these services. So this was very crucial for them to implement the new system. It is still scripted. Basically, the system remained the same. The only challenge here was how to get the status out of the OMI. And in the old OM, we used direct database access. In the new, we tried to first use the so-called CI status alert, which sounds like a good idea, because whenever the CI, you just say, okay, when this CI changes status, I want to be informed. I want you to create an action, run a command, and it will do whatever it has to do. It turned out it's unreliable. Sometimes it just wouldn't fire. So that was one thing we had to deal with. Ultimately, we found out there is a web service API which will give you the status of any CI from the database, and we used polling and getting this information out of the database, and this ultimately works, and this is still how it works today, and it works great. So this was one thing again. So it was clear that the OMI at the time of migration still had a lot of glitches, and I was surprised because, like I said, we come from a small country. We have a demo environment, so to speak. Even our enterprise environments are demo environments. How come nobody came up with this before? Why is it always us? But anyway, we were able to overcome it in the end. Well, one thing that we had to use was downtime. So whenever there was some maintenance work on some of the servers, on some of the applications, or sometimes even service objects, they wanted to create a downtime so that the notifications would not fire, so that the events would not come. And usually, of course, it's very difficult to say to people, okay, whenever you have a planning downtime, tell us about it. Yeah, usually in real life, it just happens. And they say, okay, now in 1 hour, we're starting the maintenance, so make sure you don't fire events. So there was a need for the unplanned downtime. And now OMI doesn't have unplanned downtime. So ultimately, the solution was to use planned downtime, which you could set just 1 minute into the future. So it was kind of a it is kind of unplanned downtime. So this was a solution that the customer agreed with. Another problem was that they wanted to put a part of the service tree, part of the whole service, into a downtime. And in the old OM, you could just click on the service object in the tree and set it to downtime, and everything beneath that, all the children, all the dependent objects were automatically in the downtime. You know, OMi doesn't work that way. You have to select every specific CI, which is in real life just, you know, not feasible. So what we ended up doing was creating this kind of presets, templates with the downtime, and clicking all of the necessary objects, and then creating downtime date far into the future, like 2030, something like that. So it would never fire. So whenever you needed to put this kind of tree into a downtime, you just copy this template and then set the correct date and time, and you will have downtime for all the required CI. And this was the accepted solution in the end. Of course, the road was again bumpy. For some reason, we could not select these special CIs that I created for this special propagation, could not be selected in the user interface for the downtime. And at first I thought it was a bug, but then it turned out it was a feature. There was an XML file somewhere there which had some key that prevented this. And we had to change some key from false to true for it to work again. This was again something that you could not imagine in 1,000 years that somebody implement this into the product. Why am I keep talking about new reporting solution? Because we all know that the new OMi has a big and shiny OBR, the Operations Bridge Reporter. Yeah, well, the thing with this reporter is it demands a massive amount of hardware. Initially, if you look at it, you want to run it on 24 cores and 96 gigabytes of RAM. So this was something which was just a no-go from the start for this customer, because they had a very simple requirement for reporting. They liked the old reporter. It was lightweight. It created simple HTML files. It was working great. It used next to nothing of system resources, and we just needed to report on disk memory and file system utilization for agent-based monitor service. So fortunately, the new OMi has a very nice performance grapher, and we were able to use this. Of course, the downside is we have to do it manually. We have to make screenshots for all the service once a month and then stack it together in a report. So just the other day, I'm also participating twice a month in the OpsBridge operations roundtable organized by Micro Focus, and we were discussing that the old performance manager had a scripting support that you could kind of make a batch script where you could specify the systems for which you want the graph to be generated. And we very strongly emphasize this kind of reporter light feature is needed in the OMi. So the enhancement request is already created, but it's not yet implemented. So I don't know how much you have experience with enhancement requests, but this usually takes about 3 years to implement. So we'll see how that goes. License migration, of course. HP or Micro Focus introduced a simplified license model, which is really simplified for the new customers, but for existing customers can be quite complex. And it took a really long time for us to get to the same level, to understand what the customer has, what they use, what they need, so that the Micro Focus was able to generate the correct licenses for the customer. During which time we had a lot of temporary licenses installed, and they were really helpful at this point. I have to say there was no problem with this. So it was just a matter of procedure before this can be completed, but it was a tiring procedure. It took a long time to do, and it was very, the main point was to understand how licenses are used or how may be used in the future, because the licenses are not compatible, the old and the new view. And then, of course, when I installed these licenses, one of them wouldn't install. The management pack license, which was also they were entitled to, would not. They gave an error, like you see here. License is not decryptable. So I thought, okay, that's a bad file. So I asked them to send me a new file, a new license file. But it was not the problem of the license file, but the solution was I did not have the licensed management pack installed. You have to have at least one management pack that requires a license installed before you can install the license for the management pack. If you don't do it, you get this error. Great. And then there was, like I said, this procedure took a long time, and many times they extended our temporary license. So we ended up with 20 temporary licenses, which I wanted removed because they were just clogging up the view. When you printed a license report, you had 20 unused expired licenses. It turns out you can only do this directly in the database. So I had to turn again to the support and ask them to give me the query that will remove the temporary licenses. And then we were able to remove them. As far as the user interface goes, you know, this is the old OMW user interface. It's ugly, but it's useful, and customer liked it. They could see their services and at the top. They could see their events at the bottom. Now, the service view in new OM looks a bit like this. So I don't know what you think about it. I think it's terrible. Or possibly like this, which is not much better. You probably don't see that a few of the CIs here are actually not green. They're blue. So this was again a no-go. But fortunately, there is another view called hierarchy view, or it was called 360 view in BSM, which shows you, which you see here on the right-hand side, which shows you a view of all the CIs in a hierarchical view. And then on top of that, we set up a filter to only show us the impacted CIs, the ones that are not normal. So with this, so if everything is good, if there are no events, this view will be empty. And as soon as you get events, you will only see the impacted CIs. And this turns out great, and the customer likes it. And finally, this was their dashboard that you're looking at now, and they're very happy with it, and we're happy that they're happy, so we're all happy. So that was a good story. Of course,
Bogdan,
yeah,
we've got to kind of wrap you up because we're running out of time.
Sure. Okay. Just wanted to say this. I'm finishing now. So this is the only hiccup we had still, which American customers will not understand, is with time and date format, because Slovenian gets ignored. So we had to move to English Australian, thanks to the Australian friends that they're using 24-hour format, so we could use that. But again, it was something we had to figure out. And then there were bugs, which were finally solved with moving to the latest version. So then went to production, and everything was good for 2 weeks. And then we got, again, problems in the areas which were most painful for the customers. But again, through the hotfix and some customizations, they were finally fixed. So the bottom line, the system is now stable and it's running smoothly, and the customer is happy with the migration. They like the new look. They like the fact that we were able to put some features into the out-of-the-box features. So definitely for all of those of you who are still waiting to do this, this is a way to go. And if you use the latest version, most of the defects will not affect you. Just expect that this migration will take longer than expected. So with this, I thank you. I'm sorry for being a little long, I hope
No,
it was illuminating.
absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate it. So for those that have asked questions, they will be answered after the fact. You'll get the complete slide deck so you can see the screen maybe a little bigger than what you've been able to see for this presentation. So thanks, Bogdan. And with that, let's move over to Niels Hoying to kind of talk about what he's doing with SiteScope in his testing environment at P&M Resources.
Yep. Hi, everyone. We've been.
And if we get a little long, if you can stay on a little longer, so he's done, we'll do that as well because we're running a little behind.
Yeah. So my presentation is using SiteScope and LoadRunner to solve a production issue. Get my slide to work. There it is. I'm with a company called Public Service Company of New Mexico. We're an electric utility serving most of the state of New Mexico and operations in Texas. I'm responsible for the MicroFocus suite of tools in use, LoadRunner, ALM, UFT, and SiteScope. I've been here about 8 years. I'm certified and published and generally a wonderful guy. At least my wife thinks so. Let's see if I get my screen to work again. There it goes. The issue we had is we have a couple of websites and we had no easy way to ensure the website was actually working correctly. We could ping it with the ops tools, but we had no way to verify it was actually responding to user logins and things like that. And the only time we'd find out about it is when the customer would call and complain. Really the wrong answer. So what we'd used LoadRunner to load test our sites, and so we knew how it was supposed to work. And we used a feature within SiteScope to use a LoadRunner script running in what's called web script monitor protocol. It's a protocol that's not really well known, but is really very, very powerful. Web script monitor, like I said, is part of SiteScope. It allows a LoadRunner script to be run against the site. The nice thing about it is you don't need a controller, you don't need VUGen, you don't need anything LoadRunner-like once you have it in the SiteScope environment. It can include text validation, so you can actually do script checks to make sure fields that you're expecting are populated with the correct value. Like the rest of SiteScope, it can generate alerts. It can be run 24/365. And another nice feature is it can collect logs for post-event review. If you want to see how its performance last Saturday morning for some reason, it's available if you set it up to keep those logs. So to do this, simple things, first off, your website has to be HTML. Something fancy or complex, LoadRunner web script monitor or SiteScope web script monitor is not going to work. It can support SSL. You do have to kind of talk to the LoadRunner experts about how to do that, but it can do it. To create it, it's pretty simple. You create your LoadRunner and your SiteScope versions need to be in synchronization. It means there are some versions where LoadRunner and SiteScope have to be the same, or at least at an equivalent or compatible version. Talk to your support vendor for it. That when you create your LoadRunner script, you then zip up the results. Anybody that does LoadRunner knows what this is all about. You bring it over to your site server, SiteScope server, and then you select the monitor you're going to use, which is called web script. Then you select your counters. Just like everything else in SiteScope, there are a whole laundry list of things you can measure. For us, we were only really concerned with status and duration. How long did the different pages take to open? We were worried about if the page was opening slow, we wanted to know about it. Each counter you select uses a SiteScope point. That is how SiteScope is licensed by points. So you pick the ones you want. As you can see here, I picked, just a couple. Total and status. Once you have your counters, you need to define what the rules are. So here we have our counters we selected, but there's question marks, which means it doesn't know is this response time of 90 milliseconds good or bad. So you have to teach it what the rules are because it doesn't know. Once you've established what the rules are, you can come back to this dashboard view, which you see, and you see lots of green happy check marks, meaning your status is good. This is all very user controllable. The other thing that can happen is when an event happens that triggers an alert, you can send alerts. There's a whole bunch of different ways. The alerts we've chosen to use are an email, and it can also send a text message. So you can see in this message, for example, SiteScope had an alert. at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It's sent to my company email address, my cell phone, and also my home email address. And basically, this is all text you can configure. You get to set it up for each different alert, set it up to be what you want. In our situation, we were concerned if the page took longer than 10 seconds to load. In this case, it took 26.5 seconds to load. That was an error. Then we also have this text down below where it talks about, this is text you can put in, and this is how we've configured our site. We test these sites every 3 minutes. We generate these alert emails if a test fails 3 times in a row, and then once an hour, so we don't bombard the support team with emails 25 times an hour. This is all configurable based on your needs. The other thing, if you set up to capture your logs, you can go back in time and look and see what was going on. In these slides, in these 2 screenshots, the first one in red shows how long the system was in error. And it was in error for a little over an hour, 1.1 hours. This tells me the counters. This one tells me my login, my logout duration. And obviously for this first hour, it doesn't even count because the site was down. But after the site was down, I still had some situations where it took longer than what my warning level was, which is 5 seconds, for it to complete the logout. So the page wasn't entirely healthy, but it wasn't really down. Final note you have, and this is just kind of based on experience, the more logs you save, realistically, no surprise, the more space you need. Because if you're running your logs like I do, where every 3 minutes, it will fill up a lot of file space on a server. Now they're small files, but there's thousands of them because they're running potentially 24/7. Next one is false alarms are bad. We use a process where we make sure it fails 3 times in a row before we generate the alert, because randomly SiteScope will fail, the network will fail, something will happen and you'll get a random failure. You don't want to create, call out the fire department unless you're really sure there is a problem. And that is the end of my presentation. Everyone, thank you very much for attending.
Wow, you knocked that out. So I think I've got a few questions because we've got some time, and I'm trying to see if it's for you or for Ogden. One was web script monitors are very powerful, great from a JavaScript enabled websites. Note that they require special SiteScope licenses. Okay, that was more, it wasn't a question, but.
Yeah, you do have to buy the web script monitor protocol, but it's really pretty cheap. I mean, we bought it just because we had some leftover money when we did the load runner installation.
Gotcha. And let's see, it's back to me on my screen. Let me just pop this back up. And the other question was, let's see, whoops, there we go. What about ETL for the logs with an effective roll-up strategy? How is that about SiteScope?
Well, I have not tried any ETL to roll it up. There are a bunch of very nice custom report or canned reports within the SiteScope tool to look at that data across things. I would assume you could, they're just CSV files, you could parse them and do ETL with them if there was some specific thing you wanted to do. I've not had the need, so I've never done it.
Okay, great. Ogden, are you still on?
Yeah, I'm here.
So I've got a question for you. How long did the OMI migration take?
Well, the whole thing with the planning and everything, I would say it took about a year. Ultimately, when it started working, it took about 6 months, I would say, from day one to the production. Yeah. Okay.
Do you know what vendor provided the service management integration?
The service it was us. We did it.
So you guys did the whole thing, both the OMI and the service management.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Any other thoughts you guys have that you want to share with the group? Because we've got a few minutes. Any other feedback?
Well, I guess for me, the only thing I would leave with is this web script monitor is incredibly powerful and incredibly underutilized by people. Your ops teams can use this pretty easily off of the testing tool suite, or if they already have SiteScope in use for monitoring server health. This has turned out to be incredibly popular. I've got 6 different websites that I monitor with this tool, some internal and some external, and people rely on it because they're doing patching on Sunday night. No user really wants to log in and verify everything worked. They'll verify the site opened, but they won't really verify the working behind the scenes happen. If you have an LDAP failure, you typically won't find it unless you're using a tool like this.
Great. Ogden, let's see, I think I might have some. Oh, no, this one's for Helms. I did not clearly understand what we achieved. Let's come back here. With the SiteScope web monitor script, are we validating a particular component on the web page? How is it different from regular web HTTP/HTML testing we do?
Well, the nice thing about it is it can be automated, so it runs without human intervention after the script is created. It can actually pass in variables. For example, when we test our public-facing website for our utility customers, we actually log into the website and verify that selected components actually load on the subsequent pages that happen after login. That you can certainly do with a VUGen script, but you have to have somebody sitting there actually pushing the VUGen process to run. With SiteScope Web Script Monitor, it just runs by itself with no human intervention unless there's a problem.
More automated, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Ogden, one of the questions that I get all the time when it comes to implementing tools, the question here is how many people were involved with the OMI migration?
Rock, what you just answered here on the chat, yeah. There was actually 4 people on this migration, and all of the HP support, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you know,
and
you brought up
the escalation managers and all of the kind of things which that had to whenever we got stuck with support. So, yeah. But basically, on our end, it was 4 people.
Okay. Yeah, and I think sometimes it doesn't always get marketed that way. But I know when I've had customers and they'd want to know how many people does it take to make this stuff work, both from an on-premise customer perspective, it's usually more than just a half a person. And I think sometimes management didn't understand that, but it's really important to have people that know what they're doing and have people dedicated to the different areas that need to be monitored. So another question, Ogden, in the same spot by my buddy Kevin from Ohio. How did you switch the agents from OM to OMI quickly? Use primary manager?
Fortunately for me, I didn't have that many agents. I tried to follow the official guide with this manager switching with what is it called? This I won't remember what you just mentioned. When you create a secondary manager and just switch everything, ultimately this didn't work. So I just nuked the agents and I just switched them manually. But like I said, this was a few agents only. If I had to do 1,000 or 10,000 agents, that would have been a problem. That at this point, I would have to turn to support and figure out why this prescripted migration didn't work. But like I said, it was just a few agents, so I just nuked the configuration and switched them manually.
Great. Nils, here's one for you, the SiteScope question. Tell me where this has advantages over URL sequence monitoring.
Well, I guess I'm not familiar with what URL sequence monitoring is. From us, when we looked for a solution to handle this particular need to be able to pass in a parameter and verify the subsequent page opened correctly, there just wasn't an easy to use tool. We could have probably done it using 12 other tools, but we had the knowledge and experience with how Load Runner worked, and using variables and parameters and all that kind of stuff. And it was really the simplest solution. I bet there is another way to do it. This is the solution method we used.
Another one related to that, reason for using the SiteScope web script monitor instead of BSM. I imagine it's probably the same kind of thing.
Same kind of thing. It's, we went to the tool we could find in our toolbox of owned applications.
Let's see here. I'm kind of looking at the questions and or feedback here.
Rock also found a question: how many CIs were there involved in the migration of OM? In our case, like I said, it was more or less demo environment, so we had about 300 CIs which we had to model from start. So the challenge was not to import that many CIs, it was to combine them and to create these specific propagation rules. In terms of CIs, there weren't that many, so this was easier than maybe in some of the customers' bigger environments.
So my buddy Tracy, who's been a long time HP OpenView trainer in the past, has a question: is OMW gone already, or are there still customers using it in production? What is the general urgency to migrate to OMI?
Well, I don't know who can answer that.
Support is going away.
Support is going away, but the product is probably stable. And if you're happy with it, I would say there is no urge. But sooner or later, something will break, and then there will be a problem. So yeah, I would say start planning at least.
Yeah, I'm with you. There's still a lot of customers that are just happy with the environment they have. It's getting the job done years after support has gone away. But like you said, if something breaks, they're stuck and have to move on to a new platform. So, well, we've got a lot more questions. We'll try to get them answered for you. Let me just close here. Get this out of the way. Whoops, going backwards. I had a few things here in my presentation. Where's my presentation? Oh, well, anyways, we've got a couple of SIG talks coming up. Let me see if I can find my presentation.
Okay. I've got to go to another meeting, but thank you very much for letting me present.
Thanks, Nels. So we have 2 more events coming up. There's a SIG talk on quality and testing coming up May 22nd. And on May 29th, we have a sponsored webinar from Micro Focus covering the latest from PPM, Product and Portfolio Management. So that's coming up. Our next SIG talk in the IT operations space will be June 21st. And our first presenter is the folks from eView that provide the mainframe integration to both OMI and to the CMDB environment. So we'll look forward to that presentation. If everyone can fill out the survey below, that would be great. That'll help us guide us on future events and things that you're looking for. I am looking for speakers throughout the year, and just like the ones you heard today, it's real world conversation about implementations using the Micro Focus tools in the IT operations space. So with that, I want to thank everyone for attending and talk to you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.